When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I remember the first time I heard her name. It was not in a book, nor in a lecture hall filled with eager students. It was whispered to me beneath the trembling glow of paper lanterns, while the autumn wind carried the faint scent of incense from a nearby shrine. My name is Daniel Harris. I am, or at least I was, a researcher in comparative folklore. Born in London, shaped by libraries, archives, and the ceaseless desire to understand the stories people tell, to explain what lurks in the dark. That hunger brought me here, to Japan, for a year of study. I had convinced my university that I needed to walk the narrow alleys, hear the bells of old temples, and feel the breath of forgotten legends on my skin. I thought myself brave. I thought folklore was only a reflection of fear, not fear itself. But that was before the night I heard the question, before the lanterns swayed, before the silence began to follow me. It was Kyoto, late October, the kind of evening when the air itself feels older than your bones, when shadows stretch themselves long across the stone streets, and even the cats avoid looking you in the eye. I had wandered beyond the crowded parts of Gion, away from the chatter of tourists, toward a row of small tea houses where the lanterns burned low and the voices of the patrons hushed at my passing. I entered one of them, a place with tatami mats worn thin and sliding doors patched with yellowed paper. The air smelled of old cedar and faint smoke. I remember the sound most of all, the soft thud of wooden geta outside, a rhythm like someone walking in circles, never entering, never leaving. The innkeeper was an old woman, her back bent like a bow pulled too long. She brought me tea, steaming and bitter, and when she placed it before me, I asked her, in my clumsy Japanese, whether she knew of any urban legends. The word, densetsu, seemed away in the air. Her lips tightened. She lowered her eyes. For a long moment she did not answer. Then in a voice that seemed to carry more smoke than breath, she said only one name, Kuchisake-Onna. She did not explain, not at first. She only shook her head as though speaking further would summon something unwelcome into the room. Her silence pressed on me heavier than words, until another patron, a middle-aged man with ink-stained fingers, perhaps a calligrapher, gave a dry laugh. "You are a foreigner," he said, his English halting, but sufficient. "Maybe it is safer for you to know. Maybe not." And so he told me, of a woman who hides her mouth behind a mask, of a question she asks in the dark, "Am I beautiful?" and of the horror that follows when the mask is removed. His voice slowed, his eyes fixed on the table as if he dared not meet mine. He spoke of her roaming the alleys at night, of children warned never to walk home alone, of parents telling their sons and daughters that if they heard the sound of geta behind them, they must never turn. "Answer wrong," he whispered, "and she cuts you. Answer right. She cuts you anyway, but slower." The innkeeper hushed him, pressing her finger to her lips. The lantern by the door flickered, though there was no wind. A silence fell over the tea house, so thick I could hear the faint scratching of charcoal somewhere in the back room, like someone writing furiously, desperately on paper that might tear at any moment. That night, as I walked back through the empty streets, the story clung to me. The lanterns swayed above me, their light pale as bone. The wind pressed against my ears like a whisper I could not quite understand. And then the footsteps, soft, deliberate wooden geta on stone. Tap, tap, tap. They were behind me, perfectly timed with my own, but just far enough away to belong to someone else. I told myself it was a trick of the street. I told myself folklore was only fear given shape. But when I dared to glance over my shoulder, I saw only the empty alley, the lantern at its end trembling as though someone had just brushed past it. Sleep did not come easily. The inn I stayed in was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that waits, like a mouth about to open. Shadows gathered in the corners of my room, and though I shut the window, I could still hear the faint clack of geta from somewhere in the night. At some hour past midnight, I dreamed. Or perhaps I did not dream. Perhaps I only slipped into another kind of listening. In the dream, I walked the same alley, lantern swaying. A woman stood at the far end, her face hidden behind a white mask, her kimono pale and ragged at the sleeves. The wind tugged at her hair, long and black as ink spilled across water. She asked the question. Her voice was not loud, yet it reached me as though spoken directly into my ear. Am I beautiful? My throat burned with the urge to answer. I knew the legend already. I knew the trap. Yet in the dream, my voice betrayed me. Yes, I said, and the mask began to slip. I woke before I saw what lay beneath, but the echo of her question stayed with me. It did not fade with the light of morning. It pressed into me like a bruise beneath the skin, tender to the touch, impossible to forget. The next day I returned to the tea house, searching for the old woman, for the ink-stained calligrapher, for anyone who could tell me more. But the tea house was closed, its doors barred, its lanterns dark. Neighbors only shrugged when I asked. Some pretended not to understand. That was when I realized, in this city, silence was not ignorance. It was survival. And so I began my own search. For every whisper, every scrap of story, every child's warning, every monk's caution. I filled notebooks with fragments, with sketches of mass, with maps of alleys where lanterns swayed longer than they should. But what I could not shake, what still lingers as I speak these words, is the memory of that first night. The question that hung in the air, unanswered. The footsteps that matched my own. The way the lanterns trembled as though bowing to something that had just passed through. If you listen closely now, wherever you are, you might hear it too. A faint tapping, like wooden sandals following you home. A question forming in the dark, waiting for your breath to falter, for your courage to slip. And when it comes, when the voice asks softly, "Am I beautiful?" I pray you will not answer, because once you do, the lanterns will begin to sway. When you live long enough in a foreign city, the streets begin to recognize you. They remember the pattern of your steps, the hesitation at each unfamiliar turn, the pause you make when you look up at a roofline as if expecting to see something more than wood and tile. Kyoto was no different. After weeks of walking its veins of stone and narrow passageways, I began to believe the city itself had learned my name. But not all recognition is welcome. Sometimes the city notices you in the same way a predator notices prey. In the days after I first heard the name Kuchisake-Onna, I could not escape the sense that the story was following me. At the university where I spent mornings reading brittle pages of folk archives, I found notes scratched hastily in the margins. Beware of the woman with the mask. At shrines, when I tried to ask the priests about the legend, they shook their heads and offered me incense instead, as though smoke might be an answer. Yet the silence spoke louder than words. Children on their way home from school would lower their voices when I passed, glancing toward the alleys. I began to hear rumors in fragmented phrases. A boy who never reached home, a girl who stopped to answer a question and was never seen again. The police said little. Their reports spoke only of disappearances, never causes. But the city itself whispered differently. One evening, as dusk drew its slow veil across the tiled rooftops, I found myself wandering farther than I intended. I had followed the faint sound of bells, wind chimes perhaps, or maybe the hollow ring of prayer instruments, and it led me into a district nearly abandoned, where shutters hung loose on their hinges and moss crept across stone walls. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth. Lanterns hung above the narrow street, unlit, their paper faded to a ghostly gray. That was where I saw the marks. Scratches along the wall, too high for a child to make, too random to be anything but frantic. They looked like the desperate trails of fingernails clawing for escape. Beneath them, the faint glimmer of something metallic caught my eye. I bent down and found a broken blade of scissors, rust already eating its edge. I held it in my hand longer than I should have. It was still cold. That night I dreamed again. This time I stood in the same alley, the broken scissors still in my palm. The air was thick with silence, the kind that pushes into your ears until you hear only your own blood. From the shadows a figure emerged. She wore a mask as before, but her hands gleamed. The blades of scissors, impossibly long, reflected the dim light of the lanterns, opening and closing with a rhythm that matched the beat of my heart. Snap, snap. And then the voice. Am I beautiful? I wanted to wake. I wanted to scream myself back to the safety of my room. But my body refused me. All I could do was stand there, my throat dry, as the mask began to tilt downward, her fingers brushing against it. Snap! That was when the footsteps woke me, not in the dream, outside my door. Slow, deliberate, wooden sandals against the inn's wooden hallway. I sat up in the dark, every nerve trembling. The sound moved closer. Tap, tap, tap. A pause. Another step. The floor creaked with weight. I whispered to myself, it's another guest. Only another guest. But the inn had been empty for days. The footsteps stopped outside my door. Silence pressed in, so absolute that even the wind held its breath. Then softly, the sliding paper door shivered against its frame. Not opening, only testing. I did not sleep again that night. The following morning, I sought answers. At the university, I pressed one of my colleagues, a young assistant named Hiroshi, who had once studied folk beliefs before turning to linguistics. When I mentioned the footsteps, his face drained of color. You should not listen, he told me. His voice was a whisper, though we stood in a crowded archive. If you hear them, you walk faster. Do not turn. Do not stop. And above all, his voice broke. Do not answer her. Answer her? I asked. He only shook his head and gathered his books, leaving me with more silence. That evening, as though summoned by his warning, I found myself once more in the forgotten part of the city. Perhaps I had wandered too far in thought. Perhaps something had led me. The air was colder, sharper. The alley seemed narrower than before, the walls bending inward, leaning toward me like listening ears. And then, the footsteps, behind me, faint but deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I walked faster. They matched me. I slowed. They slowed. Always behind me, never ahead, never fading. I could not bring myself to turn. My chest tightened with each breath, the air thinner than it had been moments ago. My ears strained for any other sound, anything. But the world seemed to have been swallowed whole. At the end of the alley, a lantern flickered to life. I do not know who lit it. Its flame was weak, shuddering, as though about to die. Yet its presence gave me just enough courage to step into the open street beyond. When I crossed the threshold of that light, the footsteps stopped. I tell myself now that it was only the echo of my own shoes, the tricks of an unfamiliar street. But deep within, I know better. Because when I reached my room that night, I found something waiting on the tatami mat. A single broken mask. The kind you might buy cheaply at a festival. But this one was smeared with something darker than paint. Something that left the air sour with iron. And written beside it, in faint strokes, as if traced by a shaking hand, were words in English. Do you think I am beautiful? I burned the mask in the brazier outside the inn, watching the paper curl into black fragments that scattered into the night sky. But even as the ashes drifted, I could still hear it. The echo of footsteps in the alley, following, waiting, never far behind. And though I tried to convince myself that I had destroyed the threat, a thought lingered, heavier than the smoke in my lungs. What if burning the mask had not freed me? What if it had only marked me? Because even now as I speak, I swear I hear it. That slow, patient rhythm. Tap, 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 closer, always closer. It began with the sound of rain, not the heavy kind that drums against the earth, but the soft drizzle that lingers like breath against glass. Kyoto's streets glistened that night, their stones slick with reflections of lanterns and neon alike, a strange marriage of old and new. The alley smelled of wet cedar and faint incense drifting from some hidden shrine. I carried my umbrella low, the ribs of bamboo creaking as drops struck the paper. My notebook was tucked beneath my coat, heavy with scribbled warnings and fragments of stories. Each page seemed to weigh more than paper should, as though the words themselves had substance, like lead pressed into my pocket. But what I remember most is not the rain, nor the silence between drops. It was the sense that someone else was walking just beyond the reach of my umbrella. I had wandered into a narrow lane near Pontocho, where the lanterns swayed faintly and the laughter of distant revelers grew dim. The world there seemed thinner. The air stretched taut as though a veil separated me from something I should not see. And then, I saw her. At first she appeared as nothing more than a silhouette at the far end of the street, a woman standing perfectly still, her figure slender beneath the folds of a pale kimono. Her head was bowed slightly, her long hair spilling forward like ink unraveling across parchment. In the rain-slick light, her face was hidden by a white mask, the kind one might expect at a festival, yet here it looked grotesquely out of place. The moment I noticed her, the rain seemed to hush. Even the sound of my own steps dulled, as though the stones had absorbed them. I slowed, uncertain. She did not move, but I could feel her eyes. Yes, even through the mask, fastened on me with a stillness sharper than any blade. I told myself it was coincidence, a stranger, a woman waiting for someone. Perhaps she, too, feared the rain. I adjusted my umbrella and continued forward. But when I glanced back, she was closer. I had not heard footsteps. I had not seen her move. One moment she had been a shadow at the far end of the lane. The next she stood only a dozen paces behind, her kimono brushing the wet stones, her mask gleaming with drops of rain. My breath faltered. The air between us thickened, as though the alley itself had shrunk. I walked faster. My shoes splashed in shallow puddles, their ripples spreading into the silence. I did not dare to run. Not yet. Running felt like surrender, like admitting I knew what followed me. But every time I stole a glance, she was nearer. Always nearer. At last, I turned a corner into a busier street where neon signs buzzed faintly and a group of young men laughed outside a ramen shop. Relief washed over me like the rain itself. Crowds, sound, life. They should have broken whatever spell the alley held. I dared to look back once more. The alley was empty. She was gone. Yet the laughter of the men seemed thinner now, their faces blurred by the steam rising from their bowls. The city had resumed its rhythm, but my heart refused to follow. It beat too fast, too loud, as though it feared what silence might reveal. That night I tried to write about what I had seen. My notes, however, failed me. The words bent beneath my pen, trembling, sliding into illegible shapes, as though the paper itself resisted the memory. Still, I forced the ink onto the page. Masked woman, pale kimono, appears closer each glance. Rain did not touch her. But even as I wrote it, I realized something strange. She had carried no umbrella, no hood, no sign of rain on her hair or sleeves. The water that beaded on her mask had not slid down as it should. It had simply clung, unmoving, like tears that refused to fall. Sleep was a fragile thing that night. Every time my eyes closed, I saw her figure at the end of the lane. Each time I opened them, I half expected to find her standing at the foot of my bed, waiting, her scissors glinting in the dark. But what woke me was not sight. It was sound. The faint clack of Geta tapping the hallway outside my room once more. Tap. Pause. Tap. The steps halted outside my door. Silence followed, the kind that gnaws at your ears until you begin to imagine whispers inside it. And then, soft as a sigh, came a voice. "Am I beautiful?" I froze. My breath caught in my throat, burning. The words were not muffled by walls or doors. They were in the room, curling around me like smoke. I dared not move, dared not answer. I pressed my hands against my ears, but still the voice seeped through, as though it rose from my own thoughts. The silence stretched, then a sound like fabric brushing tatami, and the faint metallic snap of scissors, opening, closing. I whispered a prayer I barely remembered, words half Latin, half desperate. The air grew colder. The presence lingered a moment longer, then faded, leaving only the thrum of my heartbeat to remind me I was still alive. When morning came, sunlight spilled across the room as if nothing had happened. No marks on the floor, no mask waiting. Only the faint scent of iron, metallic and sour, lingering where the voice had been. I left the inn at once, notebook in hand, seeking answers. But each person I asked only turned away. Some pretended not to hear. Others bowed quickly and vanished into shops. The legend, I realized, was not only feared, it was avoided. Naming it was an invitation. Yet I could not stop. Curiosity is a cruel master. The more she followed me, the more I felt compelled to uncover who she was, what bound her to these alleys. And perhaps, though I would not admit it then, part of me wanted to see her again. That evening I returned to the same district. The rain had gone, but the stones still glistened as though unwilling to release its memory. I walked slowly, listening for footsteps, searching for the faintest sway of shadows. I told myself I wanted proof, something concrete for my research. But beneath that reason, a deeper truth whispered. I wanted to know if she would appear for me alone. And she did. At the far end of the street, beneath a lantern that swayed through the air was still, stood the masked woman, her kimono pale, her hair long, her presence undeniable. This time I did not blink. I did not look away. I watched as she stood motionless, the silence stretching thin as thread between us. But I could not move forward. My feet rooted themselves to the stones, as though the city itself had bound me. And though she never spoke, though the question did not pass her lips, I felt it all the same, rising in my mind, unbidden, impossible to silence. Am I beautiful? The city has a way of bearing its secrets, not under earth nor beneath stone, but beneath silence. And when too many mouths refuse to speak, silence itself grows heavy, pressing like soil on a coffin. That was how I learned of the missing boy. Not from the newspapers, not from the police, but from a fragment of conversation overheard in a market. A woman buying vegetables whispered to another, "He never came home. Last seen walking near the old school." Her voice trembled as though the words themselves might summon something listening from behind the stalls. When she noticed me watching, she turned away, her silence sharper than a blade. But the seed was planted. The next day I asked Hiroshi about it, the young assistant who had once warned me never to answer her. His face tightened the moment I mentioned the old school. He shut the book he had been reading and lowered his voice. "They say she waits there now," he murmured, "in the halls where children once studied. The boy, they say she asked him the question. He said yes." I felt the weight of those words press against my chest. "And then?" I asked. Hiroshi only shook his head. "No one says what came after. They found nothing, only his shoes by the gate." That evening I went to see for myself. The school stood at the edge of the district, half swallowed by weeds and time. Its wooden gates sagged on rusted hinges, and the windows were blind with dust. Above the entrance, the nameplate had faded so completely it might never have existed. The air carried the smell of mildew, of chalk long crumbled, of papers left too long in damp drawers. Crows circled overhead, their cries harsh and jagged. like warnings in a language older than mine. I stepped through the gate. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, though it felt as though I were trespassing not on stone, but on silence. Inside, the hallways stretched long and narrow, lined with lockers whose doors sagged open like mouths gasping for air. My footsteps echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the stillness. Dust motes swirled in the shafts of fading light that slanted through cracked windows. There was a smell of chalk here, sharp and dry, as though the walls themselves had been writing for decades. I passed classrooms filled with rows of empty desks. Some still bore faint carvings, names, hearts, fragments of notes never finished. On one blackboard, I found words scrawled in chalk, half erased by time. "Do you think I am beautiful?" The letters were shaky, uneven, as though a trembling hand had written them quickly, then fled. I stood there too long. The silence thickened. Then from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard it. The sound of scissors, not one cut, not two, but a steady rhythm of metal opening and closing. Snap, snap, snap. The sound echoed down the hall, distant yet near, as though the walls themselves carried it. I froze, breath caught in my throat. Every instinct urged me to leave, yet my legs carried me forward. Past the classrooms, past the cracked windows, toward the sound. It led me to the gymnasium. The double doors groaned as I pushed them open, revealing a space vast and empty, its wooden floor warped with time. Banners still hung from the rafters, faded and torn. The air was colder here, heavy with a dampness that clung to my skin. At the center of the room, beneath a skylight fogged with grime, lay a single object, a pair of scissors, their blades open wide. I stepped closer. The metal gleamed faintly, though no light touched it. My reflection stared back at me in its steel, distorted, stretched, mouth pulled wider than it should be. And then, a whisper. "Am I beautiful?" The voice came not from behind me, nor from ahead, but from everywhere at once. It curled into my ears, slid down my spine. I spun, searching the corners of the gym, but the room remained empty. Only the scissors lay at the center, glinting. The whisper came again, louder. "Am I beautiful?" I staggered back, my chest tightened, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. The voice was not asking me. It was repeating, echoing, like a memory trapped in the walls. I fled. My footsteps thundered against the warped floor, echoed through the hallways. Behind me, the sound of scissors grew louder, sharper, until it was no longer a whisper, but a scream of metal against air. I burst through the doors into the courtyard, gasping. The sky had darkened, clouds gathered heavy and low. Crows scattered into the air with furious cries. Only when I reached the gate did I dare to look back. The school stood silent, windows black, doors shut. Nothing moved. No voice called. No footsteps followed. But on the ground before the gate, where weeds split the stone, I saw them. A pair of children's shoes, small, worn, their laces undone. I could not carry them. My hands refused. I left them there, though guilt pressed into me like a stone. That night I tried to sleep, but in the silence of my room, I heard it again. Faint, like chalk against a blackboard. "Am I beautiful?" Over and over, until the words no longer sounded like words, but like scissors opening, closing, opening. And I knew then that the question was not confined to alleys or dreams. It had followed me out of the school. It had found its way into the dark. There are sounds that stay with you long after they fade. A lullaby heard in childhood, the ringing of bells on a winter morning, or, in my case, the sharp metallic snap of scissors closing in the dark. That sound had lodged itself in my bones. Even after leaving the school, even after returning to the relative safety of my inn, the rhythm haunted me. At first faint, barely audible, like a memory replaying itself at the edge of hearing. But soon, louder, clearer, until I could not tell whether the sound came from my imagination or from somewhere very near. The first time it intruded upon my waking hours was in the library. I had been studying old police records, their pages brittle with age, their ink faded but not gone. Disappearances, always the same. Children, young men, sometimes women, lost in alleys or near schools, their bodies never found. The patterns stretched back decades, though official records never mentioned anything beyond missing persons. As I traced the names, the silence of the archive grew heavier. The air smelled of paper and dust. I turned a page, snap. I froze. The sound was soft but distinct. Two blades meeting, quick, final. I looked around. The archive was empty. No students, no staff, only rows of shelves standing in the half-light. Snap. This time closer, as if someone stood at the next table. I rose quickly, scanning the aisles. My pulse pounded, yet nothing moved. And then I saw it, a scrap of paper lying on the floor by my feet. I bent and picked it up. On its surface, written in pale chalk strokes, were the words, "Do you think I am beautiful?" I left the archive at once, my notes abandoned. But the sound followed. In the train, as wheels clattered along the rails, I heard it threaded between their rhythm. In the market, as knives chopped vegetables and vendors called out prices, the scissors cut through, alien and sharp. Even in the hum of the city's neon streets, I heard it, a metallic voice hidden beneath the lights. Everywhere I went, the scissors echoed, and always I felt eyes watching me from somewhere I could not see. Sleep offered no refuge. That night I dreamed I was back in the school. The hallways stretched longer than before, bending, folding upon themselves. Chalk dust thickened the air, clinging to my tongue. At the end of the hall I saw her, the woman in the mask. Her pale kimono brushed the floor as she moved. In her hands gleamed the scissors, impossibly long, opening and closing in rhythm with my own heartbeat. Snap, snap. She raised her head slowly, the mask tilting. And though she had not spoken, I felt the words press into my skull. Am I beautiful? I tried to answer, tried to say yes, anything that might keep her away. But my mouth would not move. My lips stretched wide as though held by invisible hands, tearing into silence. And then she stepped closer. One pace. Two. The scissors rose. I woke gasping, the sheets damp with sweat. But even in waking, the sound lingered. Snap! Right there, in the dark of my room. I lit the lamp. Its weak flame barely pushed back the shadows. My hands shook as I reached for my notebook. I wrote quickly, desperately, as though putting the words on paper might confine them. The sound follows me, not only in dreams, not only in alleys. She is near. But as the ink dried, I saw that my handwriting had changed. The letters slanted, uneven, curling into shapes not my own. And within those strokes, faint but visible, were words I had not written. Do you think I am beautiful? The next day I sought out Hiroshi again. My voice was raw as I told him of the sound, the writing, the dreams. His face grew pale, his hands trembling as he listened. You've been marked, he whispered. Once she notices you, she will not stop. What does she want? I asked. His answer came slowly, each word heavy. She wants you to answer. That is her curse, her hunger. She cannot rest until the question is answered. But the truth is, his voice faltered, there is no safe answer. Those words followed me as closely as the scissors did. No safe answer, no escape. That night I tried to drown the sound with sake. I sat in a small tavern near the river, the lanterns swaying overhead, the current whispering against the banks. Laughter surrounded me, but I heard none of it. Only the scissors, opening and closing in the shadows behind me. At one point I turned quickly, certain I would see her seated at the next table. But the chair was empty. Only the faint impression of weight remained in the cushion, as though someone had only just risen. When I finally stumbled back to the inn, the hallway stretched impossibly long, shadows thick against the shoji doors. The air grew colder with each step. Halfway down, I heard it clearly. No longer faint, no longer imagine. Snap, snap, snap. The sound came from behind one of the doors. I stopped, breath shallow, my hand trembling as I reached for the frame. The paper screen quivered faintly, as though touched from within. And then, slowly, deliberately, a shadow formed upon it. A woman's figure. Long hair, slender shoulders, and in her hand, the unmistakable outline of scissors, blades open wide. I stepped back, heart pounding. The shadow did not move. It only stood there, waiting. And then the voice came, muffled but clear, slipping through the paper as though it were no barrier at all. Am I beautiful? The question hung in the air, vibrating, pulling at me like a tide. I wanted to answer, to end it, to give her whatever words she craved. My lips parted, the word forming, yes. But before I could speak, the lamp in the hallway flickered. For an instant, the shadow twisted, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, its mask falling away. The scissors gleamed. Then darkness swallowed everything. When the lamp steadied again, the shadow was gone. The hallway was empty, but the echo remained. Snap, snap, closer than before. Kyoto was alive that evening. The festival had transformed the streets into a river of color and sound. Lanterns swung overhead, their glow soft and golden, painting faces with a warmth that belonged to another world. Drums echoed from somewhere distant, steady and deep, like the heartbeat of the city itself. Children ran past clutching candied apples, their laughter bright against the night. For a moment, I almost believed in joy again. Almost. But even amid celebration, shadows wait. They linger at the edge of the lantern light, watching, patient. Hiroshi had urged me to come. You should see something other than darkness, he had said. Maybe it will remind you the city is not only haunted. So I went, not because I believed him, but because I feared what silence might bring if I stayed alone in my room. The streets smelled of grilled fish, soy, and smoke from paper lanterns. Stalls lined the road, their banners painted with characters I struggled to read. Music drifted from flutes and shamisen, mingling with the steady drum. I let the tide of the crowd carry me, notebook tucked under my arm, eyes darting from face to face. For a time, I felt almost anonymous, just another foreigner lost in celebration. But the sound followed. At first, I thought it was firecrackers, faint and sharp among the drums. Then I realized the rhythm was too deliberate, too familiar. Snap, snap, scissors, always scissors. I turned quickly, scanning the crowd. The faces blurred in the shifting light. Children laughing, women in yukata, old men drinking from paper cups. Nothing unusual, nothing wrong. Yet in the corner of my eye, I caught it, a pale shape slipping between bodies, moving without touching them, gliding as though the crowd parted of its own will. A woman in a white mask. She kept her distance at first, just beyond the lantern glow, lingering at the edges of stalls. My pulse quickened. I tried to follow, but each time I pushed through the crowd, she was farther away, her form dissolving like smoke. Still, she never vanished entirely. Always at the corner of sight, always just out of reach. At one point, I stopped before a stall selling masks. Foxes, demons, smiling maidens. Their painted eyes stared back at me, hollow and fixed. I reached for one, hoping its carved grin might feel less suffocating than hers. But when I looked up, I saw her standing across the street, motionless, watching. The lantern above her flickered, though no wind blew. I forced myself back into the crowd, deeper into the festival. Music swelled, drums thundered, children shouted. Yet all of it seemed muted now, dulled beneath the rhythm of metal opening and closing. I found myself at the central square, where dancers moved in slow circles around a tall wooden tower draped with banners. Lanterns hung in spirals, swaying with the rhythm of the dance. The air pulsed with drums, each beat reverberating through my chest. I tried to lose myself in the crowd, but even here, especially here, the sense of being watched grew unbearable. My gaze darted again and again, seeking her in the shifting bodies. And then I saw her, not in the shadows this time, but among the dancers. Her kimono pale as bone, her mask gleaming beneath lantern light. She moved with the circle, steps silent, never missing a beat. No one seemed to notice her. No one turned, no one whispered. She was there, and yet she was not. The scissors glinted in her hand, catching firelight as they opened and closed. Snap, snap. My breath caught. The circle of dancers seemed endless, their movements slow, ritualistic, as if time itself bent to their rhythm. She turned with them, and for the first time, I felt her eyes on me directly. The question rose in my mind without her lips moving, without her voice needing to break the drum beat. Am I beautiful? I stumbled back, nearly colliding with a vendor. His shout startled me, breaking the trance. When I looked again, the dancers continued as before. No pale kimono, no mask, no scissors. But the echo lingered. I forced myself away from the square, deeper into the festival's winding streets. My steps quickened. I no longer tasted the food, no longer heard the laughter. Every sound blurred into one rhythm. Snap, snap, snap. Finally, I found myself before a shrine, smaller than the grand temples, but older, its stones worn smooth by centuries of hands and prayers. Lanterns glowed at its steps, their light softer, gentler. I climbed quickly, heart racing, and lit a stick of incense. Smoke curled into the night, carrying my desperate words, a plea for safety, for silence, for escape. As I bowed, I heard movement behind me, a shuffle of fabric, the faint tap of geta upon stone. I turned slowly. She stood at the base of the shrine, looking up at me. The mask hid her mouth, but her eyes, dark, endless, burned through the space between us. The scissors gleamed. Am I beautiful? My throat closed. Every story, every warning, every whispered rumor pressed against my skull. I knew I could not answer. I knew I must not. So I did the only thing left to me. I fled. Down the shrine steps, into the crowd, through lanterns and drums and laughter. My breath tore through me. My heart beat louder than the festival's rhythm. I did not stop until the lights of the celebration dimmed behind me, and only the dark streets of Kyoto remained. Yet even there in the emptiness, the sound pursued. Snap, snap, not fading with distance, but following, nearer, nearer still. When I finally reached my inn, I shut the door, bolted it, pressed my back against the wood. The silence inside was complete, or almost complete, because beneath it, soft as breath, I heard it once more. Snap. Am I beautiful? There is an old superstition in Japan. One Hiroshi once mentioned to me in passing, almost like a warning wrapped in casual talk. Be careful of mirrors at night, he had said. They are not only for showing your reflection. Sometimes they show what waits behind you. At the time, I had dismissed it as folklore, a fragment of old belief, no different from the European tales I grew up with about breaking mirrors and 7 years of bad luck. But that was before the scissors, before the mask, before the question that followed me into every shadow. That night after the festival, my room at the inn felt tighter than ever. The sliding doors seemed to close in on me, the paper walls too thin, as though they could not truly keep anything out. I lit the small lamp by my futon and tried to read, hoping the words of another man's story might silence the one pursuing me. But the pages blurred. The letters seemed to shift, forming again and again into the same phrase. Do you think I am beautiful? I threw the book aside. The lamp flickered. Somewhere in the silence of the room, the scissors opened and closed. Snap. Snap. My eyes caught the mirror. It was an old thing, framed in wood darkened by years. The glass had dulled, its surface spotted with age. It sat on the low table near the wall, used more by passing guests than by me. Yet now it seemed to pulse with its own presence. I told myself not to look. But silence has a weight, and the silence of that mirror drew me in like gravity. I rose, slow, unwilling, as though another hand guided mine. I sat before it, my reflection gazed back, hollow eyes, pale skin, mouth tight with fear. For a long moment, nothing stirred. And then, her. She stood just behind my shoulder. At first faint, a smudge of pale in the corner of the reflection. But as I stared, her form sharpened. The kimono, white as bone. The hair, black and heavy, spilling down like shadows made flesh. And the mask. Always the mask. My breath caught. I turned sharply, but the room behind me was empty. No figure, no woman. Only the flicker of the lamp. Yet when I looked back to the mirror, she was there. Closer. The scissors gleamed in her hand, their metal shining with a light the lamp did not cast. Slowly they opened, the reflection widening with an unbearable screech that I felt not in my ears but in my teeth, in my bones. Snap. Her head tilted. The mask shifted, and though her lips did not move, the question filled the air, vibrating through the glass itself. Am I beautiful? My throat went dry. Every instinct screamed to run, to cover the mirror, to smash it to pieces. But something stronger held me, some dreadful compulsion to answer. I forced my gaze to remain steady, though my reflection trembled. Yes, I whispered. For a moment, silence. And then, she lifted her hands to the mask, slowly, deliberately. The fabric shifted, and beneath it, her mouth tore open. From ear to ear, the skin split wide, lips carved into a grotesque smile. Flesh stretched, teeth glistened, the wound fresh and glistening as though it had only just been made. Bloodless, yet raw. I gasped, stumbling back from the mirror, but the reflection did not remain behind. She stepped forward, out of the glass as though the surface were nothing more than water disturbed by a stone. The scissors rose. Am I beautiful now? I slammed my eyes shut, heart hammering. I could not scream. The air itself seemed caught in my lungs. And then, nothing. When I opened them again, the room was empty. The mirror reflected only myself. Pale, trembling, sweat slick on my forehead. No mask, no wound. But on the surface of the glass, a line had appeared. A thin scratch, jagged, running from one corner of the mirror to the other, as though something sharp had dragged across it. I covered the mirror with a cloth that night. Yet still, as I lay on the futon, I heard the sound. Snap, snap, not distant anymore, but near. Sometimes at the table, sometimes at the door, sometimes right beside my ear. I did not sleep. The next morning I asked the innkeeper about the mirror. She was an old woman, her back bent, her hands thin and lined. That mirror, she said, frowning, it has always been there, longer than me. Some guests cover it. Others, they say it shows more than it should. Her words carried no malice, only resignation, as though the mirror were just another part of the inn, like the beams, the tatami, the paper walls. But I knew better now. The mirror was not only glass, it was a door, and she had stepped through. That evening, Hiroshi found me again. He noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way my hands shook as I wrote. She came to you, didn't she? He asked quietly. I nodded. His face tightened. Then it's worse than I thought. If she can reach through reflections, she is not bound by place. Not anymore. I whispered the words before I could stop myself. She asked again. His expression darkened. He leaned closer, voice almost a hiss. Do not answer her again. Do you hear me? No matter what form she takes, no matter where she appears, do not answer. But his warning came too late. Because I already had, and though the mirror was covered, Though the glass lay hidden beneath cloth, I knew what waited beneath. The question was no longer hers alone. It had taken root inside me, echoing with each breath, each heartbeat, until I could no longer tell where her voice ended and mine began. Am I beautiful? Am I beautiful? Am I beautiful? They say walls remember. Every laugh, every prayer, every argument seeps into them, layer by layer, until silence itself hums with the weight of what is past. I had never believed that until the whispers began. It started faintly, like wind threading through cracks. I was at my desk, notebook open, lamp flickering, when I thought I heard voices just beyond the paper walls. At first I assumed it was other guests, travelers speaking softly in their rooms. But the words did not carry the shape of ordinary conversation. They slid together, hushed, broken, more like breath than speech. I leaned closer, and then beneath the whispering, I heard it. Snap, snap, the scissors. Always the scissors. I froze. My hand hovered over the notebook, pen trembling. The sound came not from the hall, not from the rooms beside me, but inside the wall itself, as though she moved between the beams and paper, sliding through the skeleton of the house. The whispers grew clearer the longer I listened. At times they almost formed words, syllables brushing against one another like cloth. Beautiful? Behind you. Closer. I pushed back from the desk, breath sharp. The lamp flickered again, shadows swelling in the corners. I wanted to cry out, to call for the innkeeper, for Hiroshi, for anyone. But something in the whispers held me, like a child leaning toward a lullaby, unable to turn away even as fear gnaws the edges of his mind. That night the whispers did not stop. They followed me to the futon, circling the room, sometimes above, near the ceiling, sometimes low, crawling along the floor, and always between them, the scissors cut the silence. Snap, snap. I pressed my hands over my ears. It made no difference. The sound came not through air, but through bone. At some point, exhaustion dragged me under. In dreams, the walls opened. Paper tore like skin, wooden beams splintered, and from within emerged hands, pale, slender, cold. They reached for me, brushing my arms, my face, as the whispers swelled into a chorus. When I woke, the paper walls were intact. Yet on the surface of one, directly above my futon, a line had appeared. A deep scratch, vertical, as though something sharp had dragged down from ceiling to floor, like scissors testing their edge. The next morning I showed it to the innkeeper. She stared at the mark for a long time before speaking. "The walls are old," she said finally. "Paper tears easily." But her voice lacked conviction, and when she turned away, I saw the tremor in her hands. Hiroshi came later that day. He examined the scratch, the corners of his mouth tight. "She is pressing closer," he muttered. "The walls do not keep her out. They only slow her." "What does she want from me?" I asked. He looked at me then, eyes hollow. "The same thing she has always wanted. Your answer. Your surrender." That night the whispers grew bolder. They no longer stayed in the walls. They seeped into the room itself, curling around me like smoke. At times I felt breath against my ear, words sliding directly into me. "Look at me. Behind you. Do you think I'm beautiful?" I sat rigid, afraid to move, afraid to turn. My body ached from stillness, but the fear of confirming her presence held me motionless. The lamp sputtered. The shadows lengthened. And then the scissors came again, sharp and final. Snap, right beside my head. I leapt to my feet, tearing the cloth from the mirror. If she wanted to come, if she needed me to see, I would face her directly. But the glass showed only me, hollow-eyed, frantic. No mask, no wound. Until I blinked. And in that blink, the reflection changed. My mouth stretched wider and wider, splitting ear to ear. The reflection grinned back at me, a grotesque twin. I stumbled away, clutching my face, terrified to feel blood or torn flesh. But when I touched my skin, it was whole. My lips closed, my jaw intact. Yet the mirror laughed silently. My reflection's mouth still split wide, smiling with her wound. And then from the walls around me, the whispers swelled into one voice. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I covered the mirror again, but it was useless. The image had burned itself into me. Even when I closed my eyes, I saw that torn smile reflected behind the lids. By dawn, I had not slept. The whispers still moved faintly in the walls, waiting, patient. When the innkeeper brought me tea, I asked if she heard them too. She only shook her head. These walls have many stories, she said softly. Some guests hear things, but only some. Her eyes lingered on me with pity, or perhaps fear. Later, Hiroshi told me the tale of another man, a traveler like me, who once lodged in the same inn. He too heard whispers through the walls. He too claimed the scissors followed him, that Kuchisake-Onna asked her question each night. And what happened to him? I asked, my voice thin. Hiroshi hesitated. He stopped answering. He stopped speaking at all. One morning his room was empty. No sign of struggle, no trace of him leaving. Only the walls remained, and in them, scratches. He looked at me gravely. She does not take quickly. She wears you down until you give yourself. That night I sat in silence, waiting. The whispers came again, but I did not move. The scissors opened and closed, but I did not turn. Only when the air pressed heavy, only when I felt her presence bending the space around me, did I whisper into the darkness, I will not answer you. For a heartbeat, silence, and then laughter, soft, gentle, like a mother soothing a child. The walls shuddered, the paper split, and through the crack, pale fingers slid, curling inward. Morning in Kyoto carried a stillness that the festival nights never knew. The streets were quiet, stalls shuttered, the air damp with mist that clung to rooftops and drifted low along the ground. I welcomed the silence at first, grateful to step outside walls that whispered and sighed with voices not my own. But silence, I was learning, was not the same as safety. I wandered aimlessly that morning, notebook in hand. Though I could not bring myself to write. Each corner of the city seemed to echo with her question, as though every alley and temple and bridge had memorized her voice. Am I beautiful? The words clung to me like smoke. I stopped near a small stone bridge, its railings slick with mist. Water trickled beneath, dark and slow. I leaned on the rail, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I heard it, a child's laugh. It startled me, bright and out of place in the damp hush. Turning, I saw a boy no older than 10 standing a few paces away. He wore a faded blue yukata, too short at the ankles, as though it had belonged to someone older before him. His sandals were mismatched, one wooden, one leather. He stared at me with eyes too calm for his age. Sensei, he said softly, though I had never told him my profession. You shouldn't walk alone. I blinked. Do I know you? The boy tilted his head. His black hair clung damp to his forehead. You've seen her already, haven't you? The woman with the mask. The air in my chest froze. I swallowed. How do you know about her? He smiled, small and sad. Everyone knows, but only some can see. I knelt, trying to meet his eyes, though some part of me wished to flee instead. What do you mean? Do you see her too? The boy looked past me, toward the mist curling over the bridge. For a long moment, he did not speak. When he did, his voice was so quiet I nearly missed it. She asks a question. If you answer wrong, she cuts you. If you answer right, she still cuts you. The words chilled me. Then how does anyone survive her? He leaned closer, whispering as though afraid the mist itself might overhear. You must confuse her. Give her something she cannot carry, something she cannot cut. I frowned. What do you mean? But he only shook his head. eyes darting around. She listens all the time, even now. I followed his gaze nervously, but the street was empty. No pale kimono, no glint of scissors, only the boy's steady breathing in the damp air. "Who told you this?" I pressed. The boy smiled again, though it did not reach his eyes. "My sister." She answered her once. "And what happened to her?" The boy's gaze fell to the water below the bridge. His voice barely carried. "She never came home." A gust of wind scattered mist across the bridge, and when it cleared, the boy was gone. I looked wildly around, across the bridge, down the narrow streets, into the alleys. Nothing. Only stillness. Only silence. Had he been real, or only another shade, another echo sent to lure me deeper into fear? Yet his words clung to me. Confuse her. What could confuse a spirit like her? What could she not cut? Back at the inn, I found Hiroshi waiting. His face was drawn, his shoulders tight. "You look worse," he said bluntly. I told him about the boy, about the warning, about the sister who never came home. At first, Hiroshi said nothing. He only rubbed his temple, as though fighting some memory of his own. Then at last he murmured, "There are stories, old ones, of tricks. Some say if you answer her with something absurd, something she cannot measure, she falters. A riddle for a riddle." I thought of the boy's words again. Something she cannot carry, something she cannot cut. A riddle indeed. That night the whispers in the walls returned. Louder, closer. At times I swore they belonged not to her, but to a child. "Confuse her. Cannot cut." The voices tangled together until I could not tell one from the other. The scissors followed soon after. Snap, snap, directly behind my headboard. I pressed my hands to my ears, but still I heard the child's warning. And beneath it, her voice. "Am I beautiful?" Sleep claimed me despite the fear, and in dreams I stood again on the misted bridge. The boy waited on the other side, his yukata darker, as though soaked. "She's closer now," he whispered. "Closer every night." "What should I do?" I pleaded. He pointed past me. I turned, and she was there. Mask gleaming, scissors open, the wound stretching wide beneath. The boy's voice echoed as the dream cracked open into silence. "If you answer wrong, you die. If you answer right, you die. But if you answer nonsense, she must think. And while she thinks, you run." I woke with a cry, drenched in sweat. The room was still, but not silent. From the walls came the faint sound of laughter, a child's laughter, and beneath it, scissors opening and closing, patient as ever. Snap, snap. By dawn, I was no closer to peace. I paced the narrow room, repeating the boy's words to myself like a prayer. Confuse her. Something she cannot carry. Something she cannot cut. But even as I whispered them, I knew one truth more frightening than any. So long as she asked, I would always be tempted to answer. Kyoto was full of narrow streets where the past seemed to linger more strongly than the present. Wooden houses leaned against one another like old men sharing secrets, and lanterns swayed gently even when there was no wind. It was on one such street that I met him. The shop looked forgotten, its wooden sign cracked, its paper lanterns faded and unlit. Dust lined the doorway, yet the door itself stood open, as though waiting for someone foolish enough to enter. Inside, the air smelled of lacquer and age. Masks hung everywhere, from the ceiling, the walls, even stacked in corners. Some were theatrical, no and kabuki masks with frozen expressions. Others were grotesque, carved with snarling mouths or empty eyes. And among them all, an old man sat cross-legged on the floor, polishing one mask with careful hands. He looked up as I entered, his eyes bright in a face lined deeply with age. "Ah," he said, voice soft as creaking wood. "Another one who carries her shadow." I froze. "What did you say?" The man smiled faintly. "Your face tells me enough. The sleepless nights, the questions that linger in your head. She has touched you already, hasn't she?" I swallowed. You mean Kuchisake-Onna? He nodded, calm as though we were speaking of nothing more troubling than the weather. I hesitated, then stepped deeper into the shop. Who are you? A collector, he said simply. He gestured around at the masks. Every mask is a story. Some protect, some deceive. Some are prisons for things better left forgotten. His hand drifted to a shelf. Slowly he lifted one mask from its place and turned it toward me. The mask was white, smooth, perfectly plain, except for the slit, long, jagged, running from one corner to the other, splitting it in a grotesque smile. My stomach turned. That, my voice broke. That's hers. The old man studied it, expression unreadable. One of many, he said. She was not the first to wear it, nor will she be the last. I stared, unable to look away. The slit seemed too real, too raw, as though it had been carved not into wood or clay, but into flesh itself. Where did you get it? I whispered. The man's eyes gleamed. From someone who answered her question. The room felt smaller suddenly, the mask leaning closer from the walls. What do you mean? He replaced the mask carefully on its stand. Every victim leaves a trace. Some leave only whispers. Others leave this. I shook my head. Why keep it? Why not destroy it? The old man chuckled softly. Destroy? Foolish. You cannot destroy what has no body. A mask is only a doorway. Break one, and the spirit walks free to find another. Better to keep the doorway shut. I wanted to argue, to demand he burn it, shatter it, bury it. But my voice failed me. Because even as I stared at the mask, I thought I saw movement, something shifting beneath the surface, like lips forming a question only I could hear. Am I beautiful? I staggered back, heart pounding. The old man watched me calmly. She speaks to you, doesn't she? Even here. That means she has chosen you. Chosen me for what? He shrugged. Some questions have no answer, only endings. I clenched my fists. The boy, he said she can be confused, that you can give her something she cannot cut. Is that true? For the first time, the old man's expression darkened. His gaze drifted to the shelves, to the dozens of silent masks watching from the shadows. Children know more than they should, he murmured. But listen carefully. Confusion buys time. Nothing more. Sooner or later, she will find her way back. She always does. The silence stretched, heavy. Finally, I asked, then why collect these? If there is no escape, why hold on to them? The man's eyes softened, almost with sorrow. Because remembering is the only weapon we have. Every mask is a warning. To forget her is to invite her closer. He rose slowly, joints creaking, and pressed something into my hand. It was a small mask, plain, featureless, smooth as bone, no slit, no smile. Carry this, he said. It will not stop her, but sometimes she mistakes silence for strength. I left the shop shaken, the plain mask heavy in my hand. When I turned back at the corner, the shop seemed darker than before. The doorway closed, the lanterns gone. Had it ever truly been there? That night I placed the plain mask beside my futon. The whisper still came. The scissors still opened and closed. But when her voice finally rose, when she whispered, "Am I beautiful?" something changed. For the first time, the question did not sink into me like a hook. It hung in the air, unanswered, as though caught on the surface of the mask. And in that pause, in that hesitation, silence. A silence more terrifying than any whisper. By dawn, the mask was no longer beside me. It hung on the wall, though I had not touched it, and across its smooth surface, a faint line had appeared, a slit running corner to corner, as though something had smiled while I slept. They say the night before death is quieter than all others. I do not know if that is true, but the silence that fell over Kyoto that evening was heavier than anything I had felt before. Even the cicadas stopped. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And beneath that silence, I knew she was waiting. I had carried the plain mask with me all day, tucked beneath my coat, yet each time I touched it, I felt the faint groove that had not been there before. The slit, growing longer, wider. By dusk, it stretched nearly to the edges. The mask collector's warning echoed in my mind. Remembering is the only weapon we have. But what use was memory against a spirit who lived inside it? I walked through the alleys, lanterns swaying above. My steps echoed on the stone, and each echo seemed to multiply. At first, I thought it was only my nerves. But then I realized someone walked behind me. I turned. No one. Yet the air smelled faintly of flowers wilted in rain. And from the shadows, I heard the softest rustle, the dragging whisper of fabric along stone. I knew then there was no more hiding. I entered a small shrine at the edge of the district, where incense still smoldered in the bowls. I lit a stick myself, pressing it into the ash with trembling fingers. The smoke curled upward, pale against the night. And in that smoke, she came. She did not rush or lunge. She simply appeared at the far end of the shrine, pale kimono brushing the ground, scissors glinting in her hand. The mask covered her face, white as bone, lips painted red. "Am I beautiful?" Her voice was gentle, too gentle, as though she cared about the answer. My throat closed. The boy's warning, Hiroshi's words, the mask collector's sorrow, all collided in my skull. If you answer wrong, you die. If you answer right, you die. I whispered, "What happens if I don't answer?" Her head tilted, the scissors clicked, snap. "Then I will follow you until you do." I felt the plain mask heavy in my pocket, my only shield thin as paper. She stepped closer. The incense flame bent as she passed. Shadows shifted along the shrine walls. Again. "Am I beautiful?" I wanted to run, but where? Every alley would lead back to her. Every wall carried her whispers. So I did the only thing left. I answered. "Yes," I said. My voice cracked, but the word rang out in the silence. "You are beautiful." For a moment, stillness. Then she laughed softly, the sound curling around me like smoke. Her hand rose and she pulled the mask away. The wound stretched wide, ear to ear, teeth gleaming, lips split to raw flesh. Her eyes gleamed with hunger. "Am I beautiful now?" The scissors lifted. My knees trembled. I remembered the boy's voice. Confuse her. Give her something she cannot cut. So I forced myself to speak. "You are neither beautiful nor ugly," I said. "You are endless." Her laughter stopped. For the first time, her head tilted in hesitation. The scissors wavered. "Endless," she whispered. "Yes," I pressed, though fear shook every word. "No cut can end you. No mirror can contain you. You are beyond beautiful, beyond ugly, beyond everything." She froze. The scissors trembled. Her lips twitched at the torn edges of her face. Silence swelled, so heavy I thought it might crush me. And then she stepped back. For the first time, she looked unsure. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "If I am endless, then why am I alone?" The question pierced deeper than her scissors ever could. I had no answer, none that would save me. But she did not wait. Her face twisted, torn smile stretching wider still. The scissors snapped open, and her voice rose again, louder, sharper. "Am I beautiful?" I stumbled back, raising the plain mask like a shield. Her scissors struck it with a crack. The mask splintered in my hands, yet for a heartbeat the cut did not reach me. Through the break in the mask, her face loomed, wounded, terrible. And yet beneath the horror, something fragile flickered in her eyes. A question not of beauty, but of despair. I whispered the only words that came. "You are forgotten." The shrine seemed to shudder. The smoke from the incense twisted violently, wrapping around her form. She screamed, not of rage but of grief. The sound tore through the night, rattling the wooden beams, splitting the air, and then she was gone. The scissors clattered to the ground. I stood alone, the broken mask in my hands, the scent of burned incense choking my lungs. But the silence that followed was worse than her presence, because in that silence I knew the truth. She was not gone. She was waiting, and the question had not ended. By dawn, I returned to the inn, shattered. The walls bore no whispers, the paper no scratches. The plain mask was broken. Yet as I tried to sleep, I heard it faintly, inside my head, not the walls. Am I beautiful? And I knew she would ask again. There are endings that close like doors, neat and final. And there are others that open wider, pulling you into a darkness with no bottom. What happened after that night at the shrine belongs to the second kind. I thought her gone when the scissors clattered to the floor. I thought I had won, that naming her as forgotten had banished her. But victory has a hollow sound when it comes too easily. In the days that followed, the silence never left. The streets of Kyoto bustled with tourists and laughter, yet underneath it I heard nothing. No cicadas, no wind through bamboo. As if the world itself held its breath, waiting. And within that silence I still carried her question. Am I beautiful? It whispered not from walls nor from shadows, but from my own reflection. In every mirror, every shop window, every pool of rainwater. At first it was only her eyes I saw, dark, gleaming. Then her mask. Then finally her mouth, the wound stretched wide. No matter how I turned, she stared back from the surface, waiting. And always the question followed. I tried to leave Kyoto. At the train station, the platform was crowded. The announcer's voice rose above the clatter of feet, the hiss of brakes. I clutched my ticket, heart pounding, eager to escape. But when I boarded the train and found my seat, she was already there. A woman in a pale kimono, sitting across the aisle, mask covering her face, hands folded neatly on her lap. No one else seemed to notice. I staggered off the train before it departed. The crowd swallowed me, indifferent. And in that swarm, I heard her voice close against my ear, though no one stood beside me. You cannot leave. I am where you are. That night I returned to Hiroshi. He listened, his face ashen. You've seen too much, he whispered. She doesn't just haunt you. She grows inside you. What do you mean? I demanded. He hesitated, then unrolled an old newspaper clipping. The photograph showed a Western man, his face pale with terror. Beneath the headline, American professor found dead in Ryokan, mouth mutilated. I scanned the text, trembling. The description matched my own steps exactly. The shrine, the boy, even the mask collector. Only the date was wrong. It was from 20 years ago. I dropped the paper. This can't be, Hiroshi's voice cracked. She repeats. Each generation, each foreigner who comes searching for stories. You're only the latest echo. The word struck like a blade. Echo. I wanted to deny it, to scream that I was different. But deep inside, I knew the truth. My story was not mine at all. It was hers. That night sleep came heavy. In the dream, I walked the misted bridge again. The boy waited on the far side, his yukata soaked. His face was pale, his lips blue. You lasted longer than most, he said quietly. Why me? I pleaded. Why any of us? The boy's eyes flicked to the shadows behind me. She must ask, always. It is her curse. And if no one answers? His gaze dropped. Then she waits, and waiting is worse. I turned and she was there, closer than ever, mask gone, the wound gaping wide. The scissors gleamed. Her voice carried not from her mouth, but from everywhere at once. From the stones, from the water, from inside my skull. Am I beautiful? This time I did not run. I whispered back, you are endless. Her torn smile widened. Then so are you. The scissors lifted, and the dream split open. I woke with blood on my pillow, only a trace, a thin line at the corner of my mouth. But I knew it was only the beginning. Since then, I have not slept without hearing her. Sometimes I wake to find the plain mask on my wall, the slit deeper, wider. Sometimes I hear the boys' laughter in the next room. Sometimes I hear the click of scissors beneath my bed. But always, always her voice returns. Her voice. Am I beautiful? I don't know how long I have left before the question demands more than words, before the echo becomes flesh. And so I write this down, not as a confession, but as a warning. If you hear her footsteps behind you in a quiet street, if you see her mask in the reflection of a window, if you hear the scissors opening and closing, closer and closer, do not answer her. Do not run. But most of all, do not forget her. Because forgetting is the doorway she needs. And if, after hearing my story, you feel a whisper at your shoulder, a question soft as breath in your ear, do not be surprised. It only means the echo has found you. Am I beautiful? Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.